Almost 1 in 10 babies and toddlers in England and Wales are Muslim because Muslims feel at home in Britain, says one community spokesman. The figures come from the national census, though they're hardly particularly revelatory. The census itself is 2 years old. Not that you'd necessarily realise that reading the front page of today's Times newspaper. So what does that say about the current immigration debate in Britain? And how has this news story been received in communities with Muslim populations? Well, we've been to Watford and Bradford to try and find out, as Katie Razzle reports.
Friday prayers in central Watford. No under fives in evidence here this lunchtime, and most of the worshippers unaware that birth rates in their community are making headlines. Almost a tenth of babies and toddlers are now Muslim, according to the Office for National Statistics. The figures extracted from the 2011 census break down people in England and Wales by religion. There are 3.5 million under fives, 1.5 million, nearly half, are Christian, 1.2 million are listed as having no religion, and nearly 320,000 are Muslim. That's 9% of the total. In other words, almost 1 in 10 babies and toddlers. For under fives, categorised as having other religions, the percentages are smaller. Across the general population, the religious breakdown shows less than 5% are Muslim. We've come to Watford because this is a place where about 10% of the population are Muslim, higher than the average for England and Wales, but about the same percentage as there are now under fives who are Muslim. But is that a startling fact or just a fact of modern Britain that barely merits reporting? The story makes the front page of the Times, and Muslims here were not impressed.
It is there to cause controversy, isn't it, to spark debate. I'm sure if I went online and checked the comments, it would be a lot like, oh, see, Muslims are taking over. Obviously, with the Bulgarians and Romanian story, it's hot right now. People come into the country and people feel like their Britain is being taken away from them, but that's not the case. I mean, we just want to integrate just like everyone else as well. So
it makes me feel angry. I mean, the Muslim contribution to the UK economy goes into the billions. Yet we never hear about that. We never hear about anything positive. It's always a negative. So it's frustrating.
In fact, this should be something to celebrate.
Yeah, of course it should.
This is Groundville Road, the road where I was born.
Mohsin Aslam's family were one of the first Muslim families to migrate to Watford in the early 60s.
There's been a massive increase, I'd imagine, in the last 10 years.
And how does the community feel about it, do you think? I mean, are there tensions?
Watford, I think, is an up-and-coming town. It's quite a prosperous town. I've lived in this town all of my 36 years, and I've never known there to be any kind of tension. As you can see, it's a very kind of cosmopolitan area.
The human rights lawyer agreed to show me around his hometown as he questioned the agenda of the Times newspaper. Rise in Muslim birth rate as families feel British is the headline. Mr. Aslam says it wouldn't be front page news if Muslim was replaced with Jewish or black, accusing the paper of Islamophobia.
The message they're trying to peddle is that Muslims are dangerous. These are evil, bad people that are up to no good, and if you're not careful, they're going to take over.
I mean, aren't they just reporting a fact, which is 1 in 10 under fives are Muslim, and that's different from what it used to be?
If you read the rest of the article, clearly they're not. I mean, what they go on to say is that an expert says that practicing Muslims will outnumber practicing Christians. Well, so what?
But that sort of fact, how Britain is changing, if true, does matter to some. And the Times told us their story was responsible, in the public interest, and they'd have reported in the same way on any other population group. In Bradford, the scene of race riots in 2001, almost a quarter of the population is Muslim. And the streets look very different for some, who see the town's character changing fast.
I have no problem with the change in population. What I would have a problem is the incomers expect us to change to their ways, and that's very difficult.
Just occasionally, yes, you do feel a little bit sort of as if older people anyway are sort of getting pushed into a corner, let's put it that way, as we get more and more people from other countries. But as I say, certainly an awful lot of people in Bradford, Asian people, they were born here, they're as Yorkshire as myself.
And perhaps there's no better illustration of how two cultures have melded than this Muslim-run fish and chip shop.
Well, to talk about this is Rushnara Ali, the Labour MP for Bethnal Green and Bow, and the author Douglas Murray, Associate Director of the think tank, the Henry Jackson Society. Douglas Murray, what's the problem?
Well, I mean, the Times story, as your report mentioned, is not actually terribly new. The figures are from the 2011 census. There were some very striking things in that census, which have not all been picked up, and the Times picked up on a part of it today. I think there is significant public interest in this story, and legitimate public interest.
Public interest or public concern?
Well, both. I mean, of course, they go hand in hand, don't they? I mean, the public are interested in things they're concerned about.
But these are just British babies whose parents happen to be Muslim, but so what?
There are some people who think that. Then there are some who think, well, there are also problems that will come along with that. At the very least, I think one has to concede that this is an extremely significant change. One of the things the 2011 census showed was that the Muslim population of England and Wales had doubled in the last 10 years alone. I think it's a legitimate question for people and a legitimate story for newspapers to run to say, what are the effects of that going to be?
Rushnara Ali, significant change, and there's big public concern about it.
Well, I think it's completely understandable for newspapers to report on changes and new information. But actually, as your report highlights, this is not news, this is not new. But what's important is that when these debates do take place, that we take care in the way we talk about British Muslims and other minorities, particularly in the context of a fueling debate about immigration in the run-up to elections. We must all take care in how we do that. So that
you yourself
people
are not
don't feel
concerned at all
stigmatized
about this change?
I think that, 1 in 10 people in this country come from an ethnic minority background. We have mixed race families, one of the largest in Europe. The different communities, including the British Muslim community, have made huge economic and social contributions to our country. And we do need to highlight the positives rather than focusing on the negative.
Well, then
and it's very important not to stigmatize children, under 5 or over that age. And one of the dangers would be if alarmism leads to young people feeling alienated because of their religion.
OK, but if diversity is so good, why is your Labour colleague Chuka Umunna saying that EU immigrants should be barred unless they've got a job offer?
Well, he's not saying that. What's important...
He said just that. He raised that suggestion
I think what's important is that we recognise that we have to manage migration and we have to ensure that people feel at ease with each other within our society, with all our diversity, and that we are strong in that. And that means having debates, legitimate debates about all of these issues, but doing that in a measured and sensible way.
Why is it that a lot of people don't seem to feel at ease about Islam? As the chap in the report there that Katie Razzle interviewed said, there's always a negative. There's a kind of code in various newspapers, TV, that it's something to be feared, whether it's British Muslims going out to fight in Syria or, TV broadcasters erroneously saying that Woolwich attackers had a Muslim appearance.
Well, sure, but I mean, Woolwich attackers, for instance, did say that what they were doing was in the name of Allah. And you can't blame people for noticing that, in the same way you can't blame people for noticing news stories that go on, like people from Britain, born and brought up in Britain, going out to Syria to fight jihad in Syria. You can't blame the general public for noticing these things, and I think you should not blame the media for reporting them. The question again and again comes down to this thing as if people who notice these things are the problem. Now, of course, there will be some people who'll notice those things, who'll say terrible things and try to do some terrible things in response. But the problem is not the story. The problem we have as a country is what do we do with this information going forward? And that's why
Well, are you suggesting that the government should somehow engineer the birth rate?
Well, no, government isn't able to become a prophylactic device. I mean, the point about this is that there is significant public concern for this reason. The children that are born today and the religious communities they are born into are likely to have a very significant impact on the country tomorrow. And there are reasons for people in this country, including prominent Muslims who have spoken about this, there are reasons to be concerned because of some things that are done from within small segments of the Muslim community. It's only a few months ago that a prominent left-wing Muslim journalist in this country said that anti-Semitism in parts of the Muslim community in Britain is rife and commonplace. We've just seen in recent weeks, Channel 4 has led the way in the story of gender segregation at university.
Okay.
30 years ago, you would not have thought that we would be discussing religiously based gender segregation because of a religious minority.
Let me put that to Rushnara Ali. There is a public policy implications there. Segregation in universities is one point. Wearing the veil where that's appropriate to wear the veil is another.
Well, it's really interesting listening to Douglas getting carried away with himself once again over these issues. Essentially, if you replaced the word Muslim with Jewish or with black and minority ethnic when Douglas was speaking, that would have a very different, profound implication on what he's saying. That's not to say that there aren't issues within the Muslim community on a number of fronts, but there are issues in many communities, and what we must do is not caricature and blame everybody in the name of
the Jewish or Hindu birth rate
behaving badly.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. The point is, and this can't be emphasised enough, if 2 Jewish British people had hacked the head off a British soldier earlier last year, that would have brought a lot of insight and a lot of interrogation into the Jewish communities of this country.
But the Jewish Hindu birth rate doesn't hit the headlines, does it? Let's address that point.
My point is, again, the facts matter. We cannot have a debate about this if we say everything that matters must be taken off the table, and everything that is by the wayside is what we'll concentrate on.
I'm not saying that. I think it's entirely right for the media to report on facts. It's very important that people like you are responsible in how you use that information. Well, and all of us have a responsibility.
Okay, here's a fact for you on that point. 140 Muslim faith schools, which some say increase segregation. There's almost as many Jewish faith schools. You don't hear about that so much. Are you as concerned about Jewish faith schools?
I absolutely think you do. And if I just go back to the point I made, if Jews on campuses in this country were demanding that men and women had to sit separately in events on public space, I would have a problem with that as well, and I would state that problem. It comes back to the same thing. If you ignore the facts and say the facts can't be reported, if you say the Times can't talk about the census, whatever the timing, it means that newspapers at no stage, whether it's right after a census or a year after a census, can report the facts. I think the facts matter, and I think that the way in which we see our future as a country, we have to have these facts injected into that debate. And yes, if any other minority had this problem, I would raise it about that as well.
I'm afraid we've run out of time for facts now. Douglas Murray, Roshnara Ali, thank you very much for joining me. So, as a nation, do we over or underestimate the size of the UK's Muslim population? Channel 4 News is running an online survey asking you to estimate the size of the Muslim population in your local city. And you can find that survey at channel4.com/news.